Hi, everyone. It's Professor Hall. I wanted to have this brief discussion about the readings for this week to kind of complement the lectures on the Golden Age of children's literature that you also have assigned to you. So I chose two works this week, shorter excerpts from longer books that we didn't have to spend too much time with them. The first is Tom Brown's School Days, and I think this is a great example of a transitional book. It was published in 1857. The Victorian period starts in 1837 when Queen Victoria took the throne in England. And our golden age of children's literature begins later in 1865. So this is into the Victorian period, a little bit before Alice in Wonderland, right? And by Thomas Hughes, it's set in the 1830s at a rugby school, so an English public school meant for athletic young men who playing rugby. And the novel follows Tom Brown. He's spirited, he's athletic, he navigates the challenges of boarding school life, bullying and friendship, academic struggles, and of course, because it's in our earlier period, moral development. So you're not reading the whole thing, but just to give you kind of an overview, the story starts with Tom's early childhood. He has kind of a carefree life with outdoor adventures, and after attending a local school and then a private academy, he's sent to this rugby school. He becomes friends with Harry, who's sometimes referred to as Scud and sometimes East, his last name. And he is a student who sort of shows Tom the ropes a little bit and talks to him about the school's social hierarchy, helps him to navigate some of this stuff. There's also Flashman, who's a notorious bully at the school. He kind of torments younger students. There's an incident where he is burning someone on purpose in front of a fire. And basically, Tom finds the moral fortitude to stand up to this bully along with East and another student. So this leads to his downfall, and it has this turning point for Tom where there's courage and justice and moral integrity. In the second half of the book, Tom is assigned to mentor another student, so then we can see his maturity as he goes along through school, right? He learns compassion, he learns leadership, and he helps this kid, George Arthur, navigate the challenges of school and playing rugby as well. So, what we see in this book is that we still have some of these didactic themes where it's a little bit moralistic. We are definitely trying to teach children lessons from these stories, but it paves the way for later works. It's embracing a little bit of adventure, a little bit of child-centered storytelling. There are adults, but he is away at this school, so like parental figures don't play as big of a role as much as some of the other boys at the school. So I think it's like, you'll see a difference between this and Alice in Wonderland that you're going to start next week, which is just filled with fantasy and illogic and all of that kind of thing. But I do think it's an important book. It sets up this idea of the school story, a story trope or structure that's carried through even in many popular books today. Harry Potter is a great example. That's a mixture of school story and fantasy, kind of combining some of the genres that we're looking at, right? And it does remain grounded in realism, which we're going to also see carry through in some of our later books that explore different regions of the United States, different regions of Canada, looking at local color. And it's trying to depict things in a realistic way to show the structure of British education, the social challenges of adolescence, the realistic way in which children form friendships and bully each other and all of that. And yet we still have this very heavy emphasis on moral development, particularly in, I think, the chapter excerpt I gave you is a fun little example of this. So we have this blend of realism and moral instruction. Tom is struggling with academic pressures, and so are his friends. And so they start getting cheat sheets, which are called crib books, for their lessons. It's a common temptation that kids have, right? Should we cheat on this or not? And it's this like little moral dilemma that a lot of younger readers might have also faced. The novel doesn't just like condemn cheating outright, which is really fascinating to me because, you know, if it had been written 20 or 30 years before, it would have. But because it's in this transitional period, it doesn't. It explores like the psychological and social pressures. Like, why are the students cheating? Why do they feel kind of compelled to do this? Tom, who was a little rebellious in the beginning of the book, not a perfect example like Goody Two Shoes I talked about in my other lecture. He starts to recognize the importance of integrity and living a life that is an honest life. And he starts to reject this idea of cribbing and cheating on their homework, and says, you know, shouldn't we actually learn this stuff? And should we practice some questions without the cheat sheets and see how we do? So the child protagonists are really allowed to make mistakes. They're allowed to learn, and they're allowed to grow instead of just being models of virtue right off the bat. I think if you've ever read Little Women, there's a very similar narrative structure there in terms of how the child characters grow up and begin to mature and change. So it embraces this idea that kids can have some emotional complexity, and for that reason, I think it's worth looking at. Your other book is a little bit different, and that is The Water Babies by Charles Kingsley. So this is just 2 years before Alice in Wonderland. Not done as well, which is why, again, we're not reading the entire book. But basically, this is a novel that blends a little bit of fantasy with social commentary. Charles Kingsley has some of the same concerns as Charles Dickens. So if you look at a book like A Christmas Carol, or if you look at a book like Oliver Twist, things that children enjoyed even though they weren't really meant for kids, in those books, Charles Dickens has real social concerns, and he's trying to write these stories in part to help people who are less fortunate, right? And to show the importance of social equality and compassion and things of that nature. And with Water Babies, the story follows Tom, a young chimney sweep. And we do start out in a very kind of darker, realistic place. He has this master, Mr. Grimes, who treats him very cruelly. He has an encounter with this wealthy child, Ellie, and he's chased from her home. He falls into a river, and it's sort of implied that he drowns, but the fairies save him, and he's transformed into a water baby. Now, before this point, Tom has encountered this Irish washerwoman a couple times, and she's sort of a mysterious figure, and I won't get into it too much, but she plays sort of a role in this. As a water baby, which is a made-up term, and really, to me, a little bit confusing in the text. It has long passages of like, a water baby? Whatever could that be? I don't know. Baby who lives in the water and can breathe, and they're kind of like a mermaid and kind of like a fairy. That's the best way I can explain it. But Tom goes on a moral journey, certainly a spiritual journey. There's a lot in here about coming to see Ellie as like an angel at first, being very dirty. He's described a number of times in terms of the dirt and the filth because he's a chimney sweep. And then when he transforms into a water baby, it is like a spiritual change, and he's now clean, not unlike Christian baptism. So it is really meant to kind of parallel that. And there is a lot of moralizing, long passages of moralizing, which actually we don't find as much in the previous book that we were just talking about. But there's magical creatures, there's fairies, there's allegorical figures, and he learns some lessons of kindness, justice, and self-improvement. But he also like plays with the creatures underwater and has this adventure where it's just him and there's no adults. And I think that's also super important. We're going to see that again in Alice in Wonderland. Although she encounters adults, her journey is her own, right? And so yeah, again, we have a little bit of childhood imagination and wonder and a celebration of that, while also like looking at obedience and virtue and that kind of thing. So social justice themes I would like you to look for: the brutality of being a child who is working as a chimney sweep, and suffering, filthy, exhausted, abused, and this critique of child labor. And then also this imaginative space of being a water baby and having like rebirth and escape and redemption, and this magical underwater world where he can finally be a kid, right? Like he's transformed from a child to a baby, but he can finally just be a kid, and he just loves it. He loves it down there. So for that reason, I really wanted to just highlight these two books, because I think you can see what some of these earlier writers are trying to do. And next week, we'll see a little bit more successful accomplishment of this early play. A little bit. Oh, one more thing too I wanted to say about water babies. I'm not sure from the excerpt I'm going to be giving you guys whether you'll pick this up. There is a bit of controversy with this book now, because it has it depicts some it depicts some races rather poorly, and it is quite racist in places. I mentioned the Irish washerwoman. There are some things said about the Irish, as well as some things said about Catholics, Americans, people of color, and the author is quite dismissive and sometimes insulting of basically every other group that isn't British and white and Protestant, right? That's sort of what we're looking at here. It is, though, again, a very, I think, typical view of a lot of Victorians. So I think that is an important thing to note, and to look at somebody who is on one hand, critiquing child labor and trying to work for social justice, and on the other hand, having this very prejudiced language. We also have some, satirical attacks on scientists, and he mocks people actually who reject Darwin's ideas, which is fascinating to me, because he's embracing Darwin's ideas while at the same time having these like very heavy Christian themes and moral lessons and things like that. So it's a really interesting look, I think, at Victorian culture. And again, so is Tom Brown's School Days, because we have these Victorian values of education, morality, personal growth. There is some, critique of bullying and the way that these schools are being run and allowing this type of bullying. And we have educational reforms in the background that the author is championing. And we also have a real look at British social class and British identity. What does masculinity look like? What is duty? What is leadership? What is the perception of elite education and elite athletics too, right? All of that kind of thing. So a lot going on in both of these stories. I hope that you enjoy reading the excerpts, but I hope you also see a little bit of why, though enjoyable in the short form, reading them in the longer form might not be quite as fun. All right, everybody, that's it. I can't wait to see your comments and discussion. Thanks.